Hey guys, back with another impressions video on this game here, Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. Now, I did do a review on Dark Souls 2, so this video is going to be a little different. Now, Scholar of the First Sin is kind of like a remastering, if you will, of Dark Souls 2. So I'm not really going to talk about Dark Souls 2 as a game, like its mechanics and things like that, because basically my opinion still stands on this game, what I said in that review, where I still stand by my opinion. I love this game. I still think it's the best game that came out last year. And this is an even better version of it. I've beaten the game, I think, before this version, I played through the game at least 2 or 3 times. I want to say like 3 times. It might have been only twice, though. But I didn't play the DLC. There was 3 pieces of DLC that came out for it. And I wanted to... I don't know, for some strange reason I just didn't play the DLC, so I'm glad that they announced this version, which, has, basically it has, like, updated, like new item placements, new enemy placements. Obviously for this, it's on Xbox One as well, and PC. Obviously the big difference, one of the big differences is that it's 60 frames per second now, the visuals are better, the lighting's improved. The lighting is not, it's not as great as it was like in the preview builds. I know people go on and on about that. I really don't care that much. And I mean, the lighting is still good enough that it changes, or good enough here compared to the original game, where it changes some areas in a few key ways. So yeah, I will say this video, I'm going to go into some maybe spoiler type details in terms of DLC. Not really in terms of story, but more like the areas and some of the bosses. So if you want to, if you haven't played the DLC and you want to go in fresh, I'd maybe suggest not watching the video, or just maybe watching like the first part where I talk about some of the changes. It's up to you. So, some people might not want to watch this video due to spoilers or whatever, and I'm okay with that. I could definitely understand someone not wanting to watch this. Because I'm going to go a bit in depth with some of the changes they've done for this version and talk about the DLC since I had never played it before. So yeah, coming right off of Bloodborne, I gotta say, going back to this, it was weird at first. This game's quite a lot slower, but at the same time, it was interesting because it wasn't until playing this that I realized just how much I missed like the build variety. I was constantly using soul vessels. I know some people aren't too big on the soul vessel item, but I love it in this game. I was like changing my build a couple times throughout the game. Like I started with like a pyromancer type build, and then I like went with like a shield type dex build, and then by the end of the game I was like a strength dex build with a focus on rolling instead of using the shield. And I don't know, I had a great time with this like third playthrough through this game, and yeah, let's talk about some of the changes here. And I said earlier that I think this is like the definitive version of this game. If you're gonna play Dark Souls 2 for the first time, definitely go with this version. Obviously, one of the big things, is the 60 frames per second. Coming off Bloodborne, it's one of those things where, like, I don't really care about frame rate too much. Like, I know lots of people, like, just can't stand 30 frames per second or whatever. I don't really care that much, but it is, I gotta say, going to Dark Souls 2, it's quite a difference. I definitely like the 60 frames per second. Loading times in this are, like, super fast, like no longer than 5 seconds, and of course Bloodborne has excruciating load times, so that was great going to this and having those quick load times. Visuals, I mean, yeah, they're not, I think Bloodborne has better visuals, Bloodborne has better art direction, but I still think this game looks very good. I've heard some people say this game, Dark Souls 2, looks like garbage and dog shit. I don't understand that. I think this game looks great. And I mean, it is a last gen game still. I mean, this is not a next gen game or anything. But okay, let's talk about some of the changes. I guess I'll bring up like the online matchmaking. I guess they added the ability to play with like one other person. I messed around with some of the summoning in this game. You can summon, was it 3 other people into your game for this version of Dark Souls 2, which is honestly kind of ridiculous. It makes this game a complete joke. You know, I know a lot of people are scared from like difficulty for these games, but I mean, there's no excuse for Dark Souls 2, especially if you're okay with doing co-op, because I mean, this game is easy as shit if you resort to co-op. And in Bloodborne, I found the online just didn't work sometimes. Like Bloodborne, the online was really sketchy. With this game, the online works perfectly. You'll put down your summon sign, and you'll be summoned in an instant, no matter where you are. You know, when you're in human form, there's summon signs all over the place. You'll be able to summon people into your game. It's almost instant that they join your game. Like no connection issues whatsoever with this. It was great. I mean, it was one of those things that it's like, I don't know, I really love it here. You know, granted, I do try to play these games the first time, not using co-op. Since I had gone through this game a couple times, I did use co-op through the main game, but the DLC I did it entirely solo. It was troublesome. I'll talk about that a bit later, but matchmaking, the online in this is a huge improvement. You know, the PS3 version, I remember the online was actually good to begin with, but it's even better here. But I guess the more important ones, other than like, you know, visuals, I think the animations are better too in this version. The items and enemies. Basically, yeah, it's like a master quest of some it's basically a master quest version of Dark Souls 2, which is awesome. It was exciting playing this again because a lot of the items are in different spots. You know, like the dull ember. It took forever to get that in the original version. To, you know, to infuse your weapons, and in this version, you get it in the Lost Bastille. So it's like almost right in the beginning of the game, and that changes things quite a bit. The fragrant branch of yore. It wasn't until like what, Earthen Peak maybe, that you got your first one. And in this, you can buy it from one of the merchants near the beginning of the game right away. So you can like access the shaded ruins really early in the game. So it even changes progression. Like the progression is changed due to these item placements. There'll be like statues where you have to use the fragrant branch of yours in different locations now. So that changes things up. It was, I don't know, it felt fresh going through this game again. With a game that's already, to me, has an immense amount of replay value. It was great to go back to this game and see all these new item locations. It was exciting again to see like a corpse in the distance with an item and to think, oh, he could have something entirely different. That corpse. Enemy placements entirely different every level. Every level. I think there's some enemies that are generally the same. And I think for the most part, it's better. I think the game in general has been made easier because of these enemy placements. Some places are harder, though. The Hyde's Tower of Flame, that's actually probably the one area in this new version I think they made worse. Basically, they just put, like, I want to say, like, at least 10 more enemies in that section. And that's, like, an early game area, which I don't know if they really needed to make that area harder. Especially in that way. I don't know. I thought it was kind of frustrating, honestly, in this new version with all the enemies they put in, as well as like the dragon. They've put like a dragon in that area too now, which is a bit ridiculous. And I think Iron Keep is the one area I think they made worse. The enemy placements are generally the same there, but it seems to me like they made the aggro range of the enemies a lot. Basically. These enemies could be like way far off in the distance, and you'd aggro them just from coming into the area, and they'd run straight after you. It basically makes it so that you can't run to the Smelter Demon anymore, which that's kind of a pain because he's easily one of the hardest bosses in the game, and you can't run to him anymore. You have to kill every enemy in that area, which that's another thing. I mean, I'm kind of glad that respawn mechanic's in here, where if you kill an enemy like 11 or 12 times, that enemy will stop respawning. I had to make use of that in one of the DLCs. But yeah, I mean, that's about it in terms of changes. There might be a few things I'm missing. I obviously don't want to spoil, like, you know, all the enemy and item placements, but yeah, really cool. I definitely... Yeah, like I said, it's kind of like a Master Quest remastered version. I guess it is a bit of a disappointment that you can't play the actual vanilla version. You have to play with these new item and enemy placements, which some people might be bothered by that. Because I think this version, though, like is way better. in terms of that stuff. It doesn't bother me too much. Um, but yeah, great stuff. Um, I guess before I talk about the DLC, I wanted to kind of playing this game again, I wanted to see, okay, everyone thinks this is like the worst game in the series, the Souls series. I know a lot of people say this game's absolute shit. I'll never understand that, but people think it's shit. So I went into this game with a bit different expectations and kind of to really focus on the level design. And yeah, level design wise, this game doesn't really stack up to Bloodborne or Dark Souls or even Demon Souls. The levels don't really have this interconnected feeling. Like it's basically you're like searching for the next bonfire. You just got to get to that next bonfire. The levels, some of them can be quite big with multiple paths, but you're generally always going to be heading towards the same destination. The first half of the game, I like quite a bit with its non-linearity. You can go to many different locations right off the bat. Which is cool, but I think it's mainly the areas themselves don't have that feeling of wrapping around themselves. It's kind of hard to explain, but and a lot of the game, I won't admit, playing this game again, I realized that a lot of the areas are basically you can tell they just kind of like throw in a bunch of enemies at you, a bunch of really hard enemies. There's a lot of rooms in this game where it's just a bunch of enemies thrown at you. Hyde's Tower and of Flame, for instance, like. Yeah, that level's not that great from a level design perspective. It's just like a straight path, and you have like a left path and a right path, and just enemies thrown about. But I mean, some areas I think are really great. Like the Lost Bastille, for instance. I think level design wise, that place is fantastic. A lot of different paths and how there's like a kind of. I don't really want to say too much on that, but yeah, like the gutter, as I know, and that like the gutter, I know a lot of people hate, but I think with the new lighting in this version, you actually have to use the torch in that level, and I thought it made that level fresh. Where like in the PS3 version, I didn't even need the torch, so that level was kind of boring. But this time around, I needed to use the torch and light the torches from one torch to the next, to the next, to the next, lighting my path as I went. And I thought it made the level really cool. In fact, it's actually probably one of my favorite areas in the game. And environment variety. Like there's an immense amount of like variety to these environments. I find. I think the game's maybe a bit less. Like I'd like Dark Souls and Demon Souls and Bloodborne have some like really creative, fucked up areas. And they have like I don't know. They're very dark. Not like dark in the like. It's hard to describe. I can't really describe it. This game just has a much brighter tone. I guess it's more. It does feel a bit more like generic high fantasy. I guess you could say compared to say Dark Souls. But the second half of the game, I think the areas are a bit more interesting. Like the Dragon area, I still think that place is absolutely amazing visually and level design wise. I quite like it as well. Shrine of Amana, of course, is a standout. Although honestly, I find that place actually kind of just irritating. But actually, this playthrough, I did actually use the bow. I've always ignored the bow in these games. And I remember Stephen the Leggy Gamer and Joe Cordmeffin, they were telling me the bow was like super overpowered in these games, and I'd heard that from other people too. And yeah, it's the main game. And in fact, the DLC as well. It's very overpowered. It made the Shrine of Amana an absolute joke. Whereas my first playthrough, I was a melee only character, and that place was a fucking nightmare. This time around, it wasn't so bad though. But yeah, I mean, level design wise, I don't think it stacks up to the other Souls games. But as far as like other video games, the level design completely blows most games out of the water. I think. And I think a lot of the disappointment with Dark Souls 2 just comes from comparing it to the other Souls games. I still do prefer this game to Demon Souls. I've talked about that before. I don't know, that Demon Souls has a lot of mechanics and things that annoy me, and it's always felt a bit dated to me compared to the rest of the series. But yeah, Bloodborne, that's a different question. I can't say if I like this game or Bloodborne more right now. I think I have to give Bloodborne another playthrough to fully form my opinion as far as that goes. But yeah, I still love Dark Souls 2. I'm trying to think of like other levels. Um, I don't know. I think the level design in general, I really like it. It's got, it's not perfect, and I think the DLC is actually a big improvement. And let's talk about that now. Um, okay, there's three pieces of DLC: the Crown of the Ivory King, the Old Iron King, and the Sunken King, I believe. I did them in order of release, and right off the bat, I'll tell you, I had a lot of trouble with these DLCs. They are fucking hard. I know, like, people like to say Dark Souls 2 is like the easiest of the series. It's too easy. I've heard a lot of people say it's too easy. Well, if you find like the entire series too easy, or Dark Souls 2 too easy, and you haven't played the DLC, you're gonna like this. This is ridiculously difficult. Almost too much, almost too difficult in some spots, I think. It's I've always found that the Souls games very addictive. I actually am able to play them for extended periods of time, but this is the first time playing these games where I felt exhausted going through these. I couldn't play the DLC for hours on end. I had to take breaks. It's pretty tough. Level design wise, a big improvement I think over the base game. These environments visually I think are stunning. But more importantly, the level design itself, these levels connect in interesting ways. You'll start the DLC and you'll see an area that you'll eventually come to later in the DLC. It's hard to describe the level design. I'm really bad at describing level design in general, but I think it's a lot more creative here than in the main game, especially the second DLC, the second piece of DLC, which is my favorite. But yeah, let's start with the first DLC, the Sunken King, which is kind of it's got an Aztec temple kind of theme going on. It reminded me of Indiana Jones, tons of traps and things like that. And once I actually got into the temple, it reminded me of Sen's Fortress in Dark Souls. It was the first time in this entire game where I felt an extreme amount of tension going through here. I was so fucking cautious going through here because I never knew what was going to be around the corner, what kind of trap could be waiting for me. And you have to attack these switches to kind of raise platforms and things like that. It was really cool. And twisty corridors and things like that. I found myself lost in this place in a good way, and I mean that in a good way. I actually enjoy getting lost in these games. So yeah, the level design is superb in this first piece of DLC. There's basically one part of this level that I wasn't too big on, and that's these enemies where you can't kill them until you kill a gravestone correlating with that enemy. So they basically force you to run around. Finding these gravestones, and that I'm not big on. I really don't think they should put in enemies you can't kill unless you fulfill a certain requirement. That's kind of bullshit. So I was running around dying constantly trying to find where these gravestones were. But yeah, the enemies in this first DLC, the main game I blazed through, I'd gone through it many times before. I didn't have too many problems, but as soon as I hit the DLC, these enemies hit super hard. I wasn't doing any damage to them. There was enemies all over the place. It was ridiculous. It was a huge spike in difficulty. And I found without the bow, I don't know how I would have done some things, especially in this first DLC where you have guys with bows all around the place. I had to pick off all these types of enemies with my bow. And one complaint I have with this DLC and with all the DLCs here, and I've seen this online too, they really did not design these for magic users. It's almost like they didn't want people using magic in Dark Souls 2. Obviously the miracles got nerfed after a certain point. They were apparently too powerful, which I don't know why they would need to nerf it so hard. I mean, miracles are basically useless now. There's no point in doing a faith build, that's kind of disappointing. And this DLC, I swear, if you're not a melee user, you're going to have a tough time. I had a tough time just using melee, but I don't see how you could possibly use magic through this DLC. All the enemies in all the DLCs are magic and fire resistant. It's ridiculous. And the bosses, I swear, they're designed around a melee focus. So in that regard, I found the DLC to be pretty unbalanced, which is a bit unfortunate. But overall, the Sunken King DLC, the level design's excellent. In terms of length, like each DLC is pretty lengthy too. They each have like 3 bosses, quite a few bonfires. They each have like their own optional area. So they took me, I want to say, at least like 6 to 10 hours each. I think like one of them took me even longer than that because, well, it's basically the bosses I spent the most time on, which I guess I'll talk about that. So in the Sunken King DLC, the main boss of it is, I forget her name, but she reminds me of the final boss in Dark Souls 2, but she'll basically summon like enemies, like skeletons, some of these like pig enemies that you find in Majula, and then she can summon Velstadt, which is a boss in Dark Souls 2, which that caught me off guard, and I was never able to beat her when she summoned Velstadt. As soon as she did that, I was dead. It was over. This boss was, yeah, a rude awakening. I mean, it was tough getting through the DLC, getting through the actual level, but once I got to her, I was just like, oh shit, man. But surprisingly enough, it didn't take too many tries. I think it took like at least like 5 or 6 tries. Eventually, I did get her. I had to get a bit lucky. Once she summons the skeletons, that's when it's a bit easier because you can easily kill the skeletons, and her attacks are pretty easy to dodge. But a really fun fight. But after that, you have basically like I think there was another boss which is kind of optional, and then there's like an optional section. Each of these 3 DLCs have like these optional sections that end off in a boss, and these are like I guess they're considered optional challenges because these areas are some of the hardest areas I've seen in a Souls game. They are brutal. They're basically these long treks with like millions of enemies. Of course, I'm exaggerating there, but like tons of enemies thrown at you, and they're absolutely brutal. This one in this first DLC, you've got all these curse shooting statues at in this area, in this like this cave system. All these ridiculously tough enemies. It's a long, brutal trek that's impossible. Like it's impossible to dodge all these attacks. And at the end of it, you have one of the most annoying bosses I've faced in a Souls game, where it's basically like 3 NPCs in this really annoying arena where you can like fall off, and there's like statues shooting curses at you while you're fighting these 3 NPCs. It's kind of an unfair fight in my opinion because it's one on 3, and they do a ridiculous amount of damage. They have ridiculous amounts of health. This boss must have took me like, I want to say like at least 20 tries to kill these guys, and it was not fun. It was irritating, and once I finally did beat them, the reward, it was not even worth it. Like I think I got some useless item, and that was it. And it's like I don't know, this part of the DLC, I hate these optional challenge areas. I can't stand them, and I think they're actually designed for co-op because if you're human, there's like at least 2 or 3 NPC summon signs that you can use. I have to believe they designed these for co-op because these treks in these optional areas to the bosses are ridiculous. It's one of those things where every time I die on the boss, I'd be so pissed off because I'd have to go through all this bullshit again just to get back to the boss, which I hated. So yeah, that boss was not a fan of. I think that's just completely annoying. And then the last boss in the first DLC is a dragon called Sin, I think. And this boss, holy fuck, I died over and over and over again. It must have took me at least 40 tries. Again, keep in mind, I tried to do all the DLC solo. I was too stubborn to go co-op. And I don't know, I just could not get this dragon's patterns down. Like it would shoot like all this breath at you, like that covered a super wide range. It did a ton of damage. Eventually, though, after like 30 so tries, I was starting to finally dodge its attacks and understand how the fight went. It has a ton of health, too. It's always flying in the air, and because I'm a melee user, I have to wait for it to come back down. And apparently it's considered one of the easiest bosses in the DLCs, but I don't know, I really struggled against it. But I actually enjoyed it. I actually do enjoy the fight. I thought it was actually very tense. Super satisfying when I finally took it down. So yeah, overall the first DLC, I really like it. It shows a great improvement in level design compared to the main game. And I think with all of these DLCs, I'm very excited to see what Dark Souls 3 is going to be like. Because obviously this isn't Miyazaki's team that did Dark Souls 2. But you can tell they learned a lot through these DLCs. And I think a lot of the complaints about Dark Souls 2, people might not have those with Dark Souls 3, at least hopefully. But yeah, the first DLC, Sun King, really enjoyed it, with the exception of that optional challenge area, which I hated. The second DLC, Crown of the Old Iron King, is easily my favorite of the three. It's kind of like an ash, snow, fire tower of sorts. I think it's called like Broom Tower, where you start at the top and you make your way down, and halfway through you kind of activate the tower, where you'll basically activate these lifts that will take you all throughout the tower. And the level design here is absolutely amazing. Not only with its like how interconnected this tower is, but with a lot of the mechanics in this tower, where you actually have to use the environment to kill enemies here. You have like these statues that shoot fire that you can attack and like move them forward and back, and you have to like utilize these to like break open parts of the environment to progress, as well as kill enemies. And then you've got these other enemies with explosive barrels that you can use to kill other enemies. And the whole level, this whole tower is kind of revolves around this mechanic. So yeah, like I loved everything about this DLC in terms of level design. Like there was like where Sunken King had those like enemies you couldn't kill. There was nothing about this DLC that I didn't like. So yeah, okay, let's talk about the bosses. So the one boss you have to kill. There's actually, I don't think the dragon is optional for the first DLC. I think only the 3 NPCs are optional. This DLC only has one boss that you have to do to complete the DLC. Completing the DLC is getting the 3 different crowns, and you can get like a reward from Vendrick. So this DLC, this boss, the Fume Knight. Oh man, this guy was fucking hard too. And I've heard he's one of the hardest bosses in the entire series, and yeah, for sure. Again, like with the dragon, this boss took me at least 40 tries. And that's not exaggerating. Like, I'm serious. Like, 40 tries to take this guy down. He's a badass. Really fun to fight, though. Super satisfying. When he gets into his second form, he gets, like, this giant flame sword. He seems impossible with a magic build. I don't know how anyone could do this with a magic build, at least solo. Co-op, he's probably not too bad, I guess, but his co-op makes everything super easy, but... yeah, this guy was a major challenge, but yeah, super satisfying when I eventually took him out. The other boss in this PC of DLC, not the optional challenge boss or whatever, the other unique boss to this DLC, Sir Alon. He's basically a samurai. The trek to him is absolute bullshit, and it's actually pretty disappointing because Sir Alon is probably my favorite boss in the entirety of Dark Souls 2. This boss is fucking amazing. His moveset is so interesting. He's super fun to. It's super fun to kind of learn his attacks and learn how his fight goes. It's really epic, and it's a whole lot of fun. And he's very difficult too. He didn't take me as long as some of the other bosses, but very satisfying when I took him out. But yeah, like I said, the problem with this boss though, you have to go through so much shit to get to him. It's like this long, almost 2-minute trek with all these enemies, and you can't run past them. You can't. And this is the trek that I was mentioning, I think, in the first part of the video, where I had to actually kill all the enemies here to make sure they weren't respawning, because I couldn't run through. And that it kind of was draining. And I think this is what made the DLC overall so exhausting. Generally with the Soul series, I find the treks to bosses aren't too bad. Some of them are a bit brutal. The trek to the blind one in Demon Souls, for instance, 4-2. I hate that trek. It's so fucking long. It's so irritating. But the rest of the game is not too bad, except for the trek up to the final boss. But generally, I think the series has been pretty good with this. But the DLC in Dark Souls 2, they get really carried away with this shit, which, again, leads me to believe that they designed this around co-op, which, again, that's kind of, I don't know, that's lame to me. But yeah, I was getting really sick of having to go through all these enemies every time I wanted another shot at Sir Alon. It's a bummer because he's like, one of my favorite bosses, and it was such a pain to get through all this shit every time I wanted to give him another try. So yeah, that was a bit unfortunate, but an amazing boss, hands down. And then the last part of this DLC is another optional challenge area that's even worse than the one in the first part. Again, it's like this cave system with all these fucking annoying enemies that shoot like range attacks. Some enemies you can't even like kill unless you have like a bow. You can run past all the ones in this area, thank God, but it's still fucking annoying, and sometimes you can be caught off guard and get killed out of nowhere. And to top it all off, who's the boss at the end of this annoying section? The Smelter Demon. Oh, but this time he's blue. Ooh. Yeah, very lazy reuse of a boss, and the rewards are shit. Like, it's not even worth doing it. I suggest, yeah, if you haven't played the DLC and you get to like these optional challenge areas, like, don't even bother. Like, it's not even worth it. So yeah, another disappointing aspect of this piece of DLC, which is a shame because the rest of it is so good. But yeah, lastly, the final DLC, Crown of the Ivory King, is probably my least favorite of the bunch, at least in terms of level design. Visually, it's amazing. It's like this. It's basically your snow ice area, but it's got a cool gimmick to it where halfway through the level you kind of like melt a lot of the environment, and so you can access areas that you couldn't access before. So again, it's got this interconnectedness, which I love, which was kind of missing from the main game. So like in that regard, the level design's fantastic, but I find a lot of this DLC is basically moving from one bonfire to another, and then just a ton of enemies thrown at you. Like, I feel they really went overboard with this DLC with all the enemies they throw at you. The enemies aren't too interesting. In fact, overall with the DLC, I find like a lot of the enemies are kind of like basic humanoid enemies. There's some cool ones here and there, but the enemy design is kind of lackluster, I have to say. And that actually kind of extends to the main game as well. Playing through this game again, I do kind of understand that, yeah, a lot of the bosses are kind of bland in Dark Souls 2. I actually will agree there. It just didn't feel that way like the first playthrough, just because I was loving the game so much. But on a second playthrough, there's a lot of like throwaway bosses. And again, I think there's way too many bosses in the game in the game in general. But yeah, just a lot of enemies they throw at you in this DLC. Like getting from bonfire to bonfire, a lot of the times takes way too long. It eventually got to a point in this DLC, at least for like the second half, where I was just running past every enemy. Like, I was no longer fighting enemies. I was just so sick of fighting enemies, because it was often not worth fighting enemies. I searched for all these items, and that was it. So the bosses for this DLC, the first boss is like this snow cat, and it's actually a pretty cool boss. I like this boss. Its range is ridiculous. It was tough to learn its patterns, but once you do, he's not too bad. The ice cat's not too bad, but a pretty fun boss. And the main boss of this DLC, the Burnt Ivory King, is a really interesting boss. When I first fought him, I was very confused because there was like, I want to say at least like 10 enemies on me at once, and so immediately I was like, okay, this seems kind of impossible, and I died pretty much immediately. So little did I know, I had to go around the whole level and find like these knights that would help me in this fight. Like, they're like these NPC knights, and you'd find them throughout the level. I think you get up to like 4 of them, and they'll help you fight all these enemies in this boss fight. And once all the enemies are dead, the boss comes in, and while he's fighting you, other enemies can spawn in. It's this really epic fight. Like, it's a really cool fight. I'd say it's pretty much impossible without getting some of these knights to help you. But once I understood the gimmick, I really appreciated the fight. It's really epic, and he's got like this laser sword that's really cool. He's a very tough boss too, though. It took me quite a few tries to take him down too. But again, it was super satisfying, and like with the Fume Knight in the previous DLC, there's no annoying trek to this boss. You can fight him right from the bonfire. So yeah, a great end, I think, to this DLC, where I was actually starting to get kind of annoyed with it towards the end, but it was a fitting, epic end. I know a lot of people consider this like one of the best bosses in the entire series, but yeah, it's pretty great. Unfortunately, though, the optional challenge area for this DLC is again absolute garbage, and this is actually probably the most disappointing of the 3 because you're basically in this massive snowstorm where you can't see shit. And you're trying to get to the boss door through this giant snowstorm where like these reindeer enemies will attack you out of nowhere, and they're actually really cool enemies. And it was cool at first, exploring this environment, finding all these like different areas through the snowstorm and picking up all these items. But it's one of those things where as soon as I found out what the boss was, I was immediately bummed out because, oh, it's that ice cat from before, but now there's two of them. Again, this really lazy idea, like, I don't know, instead of a brand new boss, they just recycle the same boss before and make it harder by throwing another one at you. So this trek through the snowstorm takes at least, I want to say, like 6 to 10 minutes to reach the boss. And I think that's like the quickest route once you kind of understand this environment. It is a fucking pain in the ass when you want to retry this boss, which is a shame. Because I like the idea. I think as a concept, like this giant snowstorm is a really cool idea. I wish it was a part of the DLC, but as a part of the actual level, and not like a trek to a boss. I think that's where it falls apart for me, and it's just a complete pain in the ass to reach this boss. And then it's just not a fun boss to fight either. I mean, I guess it's not as bad as the Smelter Demon redo or the 3 NPCs, but it's still kind of irritating. Especially solo, because both are aggro on you, and it's so hard to find openings to heal and things like that. And then, again, the reward you get for this boss is just not worth it whatsoever. So yeah, these optional challenge areas, complete disappointment for me. That said, you know, I think they're meant co-op to be done co-op, and maybe they're more fun that way, but I didn't do them co-op. But yeah, this video's gone on much longer than I was expecting. I don't know, the Soul series, I can just talk for hours and hours and hours. I wanted to give my like kind of in-depth thoughts on the DLC in general and what I thought of it. So overall, I was impressed with it. You know, obviously there was aspects about these pieces of DLC that I just hated, and the difficulty was definitely exhausting at times. But I mean, if you're looking for a challenge, if you just want a hardcore challenge, you'll definitely get it with this DLC. For sure. And I did it at the end of the Dark Souls 2. Like, I even killed the final boss before I went and tackled the DLC. But, yeah, good stuff. And I think it shows an improvement in terms of level design from you know, the main game. But, yeah, obviously, I think there's things I'm missing. And I'm sorry if, you know, some people watch this and were spoiled on a few things they didn't want to be. Hopefully that's not the case. But, yeah, those are my opinions. I don't know. I don't know if many people have even played the DLC for this. I think a lot of people were probably in the same boat as me and waiting for this Scholars of the First Sin version. But yeah, Dark Souls 2, still love it. Absolutely love this game. But yeah, that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.